welcome back to the Build Propulsion Lab here at Community Over Code in Denver. I'm Brian Demers, and I'm joined with Matt Topol. And today we're going to talk about Apache Arrow and ADBC. ADBC. I'm going to keep saying it wrong. So Matt, before I keep saying it wrong, why don't you introduce yourself?
So as you said, I'm Matt Topol. I work for Voltron Data, and I primarily work on Apache Arrow. I'm a PMC member on Apache Arrow. And as you mentioned, the second edition of my book on Apache Arrow actually launched last week.
Excellent. Well, congratulations on getting the second version out.
Thank you.
That's a milestone, right? Just getting the book out the door, I think, is
extremely.
It's probably a bit stressful too, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. So I forgot the name of the company was Voltron. I think last time I talked to you, you mentioned that, and it's a great name.
Yeah, I'm a very big fan of it.
All right. So for those not in the know, why don't you explain what Apache Arrow is?
Yeah. So Apache Arrow is a in-memory column-oriented data format. It's a spec. You have this way of communicating data between systems, and whenever you're pushing data from one system to another system, you're frequently having to serialize and deserialize data, and Arrow enables you to get rid of that overhead because the data is identical on the wire as it is in memory. You have implementations of Arrow in a truly ridiculous number of languages. And it just enables interoperability while maintaining a high efficient way of representing the data. And so you have a lot of systems that are adopting Arrow for their internal memory representation, and frequently people are using Arrow without even realizing it because they're using it indirectly through things like pollers or pandas, which are using Arrow under the hood. Apache Data Fusion was a sub-project of Arrow and eventually became its own top-level Apache project.
Excellent. Is that more recent?
I think that was earlier in the year.
Okay.
I think it was earlier this year, or it might have been late last year. But the internal representation of Apache Data Fusion for their data is Arrow, and they're built on the Rust version of the library, but same idea.
Yep. So great. So ADBC. So this kind of sounds familiar.
Yeah, it should.
Why does ADBC sound familiar to me?
Arrow database connectivity. It's very similar concept to ODBC and JDBC, hence why it's familiar there.
All right, that rings some bells.
I hope so. And it probably rings some horror memories.
They're not pleasant bells.
No,
they're not at all.
And that's what ADBC is trying to fix and make better. So like similar in concept to ODBC and JDBC, you've got a single client API that the application can code against, and you got swappable drivers. But unlike ODBC and JDBC, ADBC is column-oriented and uses Arrow as the data format you're passing data back and forth through. And so most analytical data systems nowadays are column-oriented to take advantage of vectorization, SIMD, and all those optimizations. But the most common way of interacting with databases now is still ODBC and JDBC, just like in the 80s, or 90s for JDBC, which are row-oriented. So that we're taking this data from a column-oriented system, transposing it into rows to push it through an interface, and half the time those applications are going to retranspose it back into columns anyways for data frame analysis, visualizations, and so on.
So that sounds very expensive.
Exactly. And so using ADBC to keep the data in that column-oriented format the whole way through via Arrow eliminates those bottlenecks, eliminates that transposition. It reduces the copies that you're making of the data.
Right. So really improves efficiency in how your applications can work with the data. Awesome. All right. So this is also added to your book.
Yes. So when I had the first edition, two and change years ago, ADBC was in its infancy. We just started the project. It's a sub-project of Arrow. In the new edition of my book, launched last week, there's an entire chapter that I added on ADBC specifically to highlight what it can do now. Because the ADBC is in kind of a chicken and egg problem right now. We have drivers for Postgres and SQLite and Snowflake, and DuckDB actually implements the ADBC interface. So you can load DuckDB as an ADBC driver. And we're in progress working on the BigQuery driver, but the problem is that there aren't many or any really applications that are adding ADBC as a connector you can use because there aren't enough drivers.
Yes,
And people building data systems aren't building drivers because there aren't enough applications that enable it as a connector.
Yes.
So you have this chicken and egg problem, and so I gave a talk yesterday here at Community Over Code about ADBC. And in addition to it trying to be informative and wanting people to use ADBC, it's also kind of a call to action to ask for people to contribute drivers, for people who maintain these applications like Airflow, DBT, all those, Power BI if you're a Microsoft side. I want those applications to enable using ADBC as a connector. Back in March, Microsoft put out an announcement how they enabled Snowflake on Fabric. And if you look at that in the documentation, there's parenthesis, powered by ADBC.
Nice.
But that's the only mention they made of it.
Right.
Which makes me, it's a little sad.
Yeah, because it's under the covers.
It's a little sad.
Yeah.
But they're using the ADBC Snowflake driver to power their communication with Snowflake for Fabric.
Yeah.
And so that's a big deal and got very little fanfare because it's just like that one little sentence.
All right. So you think applications that are consuming data, if they add support for ADBC, that will sort of push the onus or will highlight the requirement for other database vendors to add support.
Yeah. Now the other cool thing about the whole Apache Arrow ecosystem and ADBC in general is that you have wire protocol like Arrow Flight SQL, and you have these connectors that already exist. There's already an Arrow Flight SQL driver for ADBC. There's also Arrow Flight SQL drivers in ODBC and JDBC, which means as a database vendor, if you expose Arrow Flight SQL as your interface on the server side, you get all of this client connectivity for free. You don't have to build your own drivers. You don't have to distribute your own drivers. All of them already exist. They're all open source. You expose a Flight SQL interface on the server, and all of the customers you want to consume your data already have open source connectors in every environment they ever want.
Excellent. And things just work now.
And things just work.
And then it's less toil for me to build in my application.
But right now, the only big applications I know that really support Flight SQL are like Dremio or InfluxDB, but it's growing. Grafana added a connector for Flight SQL.
Okay.
That was contributed by InfluxDB.
Excellent.
But we're seeing the pickup happening. But it's slow going. But I love coming to conferences and talking about this and trying to get that idea in people's heads of using Arrow in general and using Arrow Flight SQL, the whole ecosystem, because half the time you're probably already leveraging or benefiting from Arrow somewhere in your system and not even realizing it. And if you just leverage that, you can get significant performance benefits, but also in the areas where you're not already leveraging it for like interoperability, you can then, as an application developer, put pressure on the people developing the tools like, hey, why not support Arrow? Because I can use this tool, this tool, this tool. They all talk to each other because they all understand Arrow. But I want to use your tool, but you don't understand Arrow.
Right. So in order for me to use your tool, I need to be able to consume it in the way of my choice that
exactly
meshes well with my
Arrow
application.
is a highly efficient format for any kind of analytical data systems. And so you get the biggest benefits you get of Arrow are when you're using Arrow end to end.
Yep.
You get benefits just using it for communication to begin with. And then you look at it, you go, actually, yesterday, there was a talk by someone from Bloomberg talking about how they are using microservices using Arrow and got order of magnitude performance benefits.
Wow.
Because of just that reduction of serialization and deserialization.
I can imagine, yeah.
But then they started going, okay, now we got that reduction of the serialization, but what if our services also just used Arrow internally and we skipped that conversion step? And then on the other end, you have your data analysts and analysts who are using pandas or polars. Well, those can zero copy from Arrow, and you skip yet another conversion because you can just take your data from your service and put it into these data frame libraries, and there's no copy happening, no conversion happening. It just works, and it's just building on those building blocks and expanding it.
Yeah. So yeah, that's obviously highlighting some of the power of the open source community of Arrow.
And just open standards in general.
Yes.
You know, the other talk I gave yesterday was about building composable and modular data systems. And Voltron Data, where I work, last year put out a series of blog posts called the Composable Codex, talking about this concept. And you know, your standard monolithic DBMSs of the past are all being deconstructed and becoming more these modular components that everybody's doing.
Right.
It's happening in the ecosystem now.
Yep.
The whole modern data stack thing. And the only way that all works is when you build on open standards. Because then all these components can use those open standards to interoperate, and then you, building your system, can just exchange components and make everything modular the way you want.
Right. And plug in the tools you need.
Yeah, and then
Yes.
you can just focus on the one aspect where you want to innovate and spend your high impact, your resources on that one spot, rather than having to innovate across the entire surface area.
Right. You can focus on your secret sauce versus.
And then just
versus all
compose
the
everything else
infrastructure.
into it.
Absolutely.
So you focus on your thing, use the components for everything else. That's the power of open standards.
Awesome. All right, Matt. So you mentioned blog posts from your company. Where are those at?
VoltronData.com/codex.
All right. In your book, where can I find more information about your book?
You can find it, it's published by PACT, P-A-C-K-T. You can also find the book on Amazon. You know, find me, I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn, or you can search me on, Amazon, you'll find the book there, or even on PACT.
Awesome. All right, Matt, I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me today.
Thank you.
And thanks for watching on the Build Propulsion Lab. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.